Hi, good morning, folks. My name is Bob Flynn. I'm going to be talking to you today about using Prisma Access to prevent known and unknown threats. This is part of a series of webinars that we do on a regular basis, talking about Prisma Access and all the components and parts. So we're going to look a little bit about threats, known and unknown threats, right? So this is going to talk about our signature-based protections and profiles. We'll do a quick little overview, sort of introducing the concept. We'll then talk about our signature-based protections and profiles, which are updated by Prisma Access on a regular basis with no maintenance required from you. We'll talk a little bit about WildFire. This is our sandbox, but really so much more that helps you take files and interesting traffic and determine whether it really is an attack or not. We'll go through URL filtering, DNS Security, which is a subscription. Well, actually, it's a subscription with our firewalls. It's actually included with Prisma Access. And we'll talk a little bit about that. That's a relatively newer feature that a lot of folks may not be too familiar with. And then we'll end up with a little bit of a Q&A if we have some time. Now, there is a Q&A function, as well as a chat function. We would prefer that you use the Q&A function versus chat. I will try to monitor that and maybe answer questions as we're rolling through things, but certainly we'll have a little time after the fact to dwell on maybe longer, more interesting facets of this. But if you got a question or comment, anything you want to talk about, use the Q&A function, and we'll be monitoring that all the way through all of this. In fact, somebody already asked, when will the recording be available? Somebody will answer that in chat. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm just the pretty face and the voice. So let's get going here. We'll begin with a little bit of an overview. The idea with Content ID, our threat protection, is that we can look at payload threats, we can look at IP-based threats, attackers, and bad actors and things like that, and DNS-based attacks, traffic heading to or from malicious URLs and host names, and we have the ability to use our artificial intelligence, our machine learning, our signature-based protections to clean this traffic and make sure that your users have a clean feed, that they're safe. If you are familiar with using security profiles with our firewalls, you're probably somewhat familiar with this. The idea is that security profiles are added to security policy rules to allow us to do extra inspection, look for viruses or spyware exploits or whatever the case may be, block the exfiltration of sensitive data, DNS-based attacks, things like that. You want to add those to security policy rules that have an allow action. If you add a security profile, let's just say antivirus profile or URL filtering profile to a security policy rule that has a deny action, well, it's not going to do anything. It's going to hurt anything? No. Is it going to help anything? No. We're going to block that traffic as soon as we can, and we're not going to continue to inspect it once we drop it. So typically you want to add these to allowed traffic, to allow rules, but you know, you might be migrating a configuration from a customer that was using a different vendor. And it would be a great practice to go ahead and add all of the different security profiles to every single rule using our migration tool, which would be easy to do all at once without having to do it individually. And, you know, you may get some on allow rules, some on deny rules. And it's not going to hurt anything. It's just not going to, we're just not going to inspect the traffic. So we'll talk about our different security profiles. We're going to start with our signature-based ones. So with every single security profile, we have the ability, or every single security policy rule, we have the ability to add security profiles. And I don't know if you can see here on the very far right-hand side, we have profiles. Each of these different profile types have a different icon, and I can add individual profiles that are either pre-configured or that I might customize for my environment. And we're going to talk about customizing these as we go. Oh, here we go. Sorry, technical difficulties there. So we have the ability to add these individual profiles that we might create, or we may just take the out of the box ones, or we can group them together and have the ability to have a profile group. And within PAN-OS in general, and within Prism Access, it's a good idea to create these groups. So we have the ability to take individual antivirus and vulnerability protections and anti-spyware protections and URL filtering profiles and all of these things, group them together within a single group. Based upon directionality is actually the best way to do this. And then we have the ability to put these into a single group. So your customer or you now have the ability to go, oh, is this traffic going out to the internet? Well, I've got an outbound group of security profiles that I would like to use. Is this traffic between different nodes or different users within Prism Access? Well, I have an internal flow of profiles that I think I should use. So you create these once, and then you continue to use them. We'll take just a moment and talk about the different profile types. So antivirus is used as a signature-based protections. It's used to protect you from known viruses, inbound and outbound, scans HTTP and SMTP and POP3 and IMAP and all kinds of different protocols. Has different actions. All of our profiles have several different actions. So this would be true of all of them. There's a default behavior, and the default behavior is what we would suggest we should do with that particular type of threat. Alert or drop or do a one-way or bidirectional reset. You could change the behavior to allow or maybe just alert. Allow means we're going to let it through. We're not going to tell you about it. We're just saying the gates are open. If we alert, we let it through, but we do still put an entry in the threat logs. Sometimes that's a really good idea. Now, we also have spyware protections. And again, these are signature based. And there's several families of spyware, including our protections for things such as compromised users and command and control traffic going in and out. And we're going to talk just a bit about that. I had a question here as we're going through about tunnel traffic, like DNS tunneling and ICMP tunneling and things like that. Interestingly enough, we have signatures to be able to tell the difference between things such as DNS requests versus DNS tunneling, normal SSH versus SSH tunneling, things such as that. So we actually can detect these things happening, and through your security policy rules and leveraging app ID, you get the ability to say, you know what, I want to allow SSH tunneling, or I want to block that. I want to allow DNS tunneling, or I want to block that. Well, I mean, blocking would be a great idea, but you have control over that. We can certainly detect that. And in some cases, we can see what is going on. In other cases, it's just, hey, you know, it's happening. And I don't know if this is good or bad stuff, but chances are it's pretty risky behavior. Let's just block it. One of the features we have with our spyware protections is we have the ability to leverage a function we call DNS Sinkhole. So as we talk a little bit about our DNS security and protections a little bit later, we'll get into more detail, but the idea is that a compromised host that may be infected with malware, instead of an attacker coming in, an infected host is going to make an outbound call. It's going to make an outbound call to open up a command and control session. And that first piece of that call is going to be a DNS request. DNS request to a obscure host, an obscure domain, an obscure host name. We will leverage all of our threat intelligence and our DNS functionality, our machine learning, and all these other things that we're going to talk about a little bit later to be able to detect this behavior. And then we have the ability to block that request, or more frequently, and based on our default behavior, is actually to respond back to these requests for these malicious hosts with fake information, with disinformation, doing what we call our sinkholing, which basically says, hey, if you're going to this, trying to connect with this attacker, we're going to give you the wrong address. And that way you're protected, and we see this behavior that you've made this request to this bad actor, and we've responded with this known fake address, the sinkhole address. So therefore, all requests to this address, we know they're bad. We know these are infected folks, and we have reports that can help you find these users and clean them up. This is especially important these days when you have people that are working remotely and working from home and using their own personal devices. I mean, it's one thing to be able to add an antivirus and Cortex XDR and things like that to your corporate endpoints and your nodes, but somebody's using their personal computer and stuff like that, you have no idea if they're infected or or anything like that. So this becomes really important for your mobile users and your remote network users. Our vulnerability protections, those will protect you against known vulnerabilities based on CVEs, known vulnerability exploits, and allow you to create profiles to protect your remote users and your mobile users from known vulnerabilities on their operating systems, whether they're PCs or Macs or iPads or Androids or whatever the case may be. Now, on our on-premise firewalls, there's also server-based protections that would be really useful for protecting your applications and your servers. With Prisma Access, that may or may not be the point of view you look at. We have URL filtering profiles. So URL filtering profiles allow us to be able to take outbound traffic going out to the internet and going to different websites and categorize it with either a internal list of several million websites, common ones through that we have pre-categorized, or the ability to reach out to the cloud and let us use our machine learning to instantly categorize a site that we may not have seen before, and allows you to let users go to that site, block users from going to that site. There's a couple of other things, continue and an override process. Continue process lets you take a category and say, you know what, I'm going to put up a conditional block page, but I'm going to give my user a button to continue on and get past that block. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log that. And then there's an override function, which is primarily for our on-premise firewalls that lets you have a password that you could use to get around one of these block screens. But the alert and block and allow functions are what you would primarily be using with Prisma Access. File blocking allows us not to just look at, allows us to look at file types, but we have the ability to say, you know what, I don't want my users to be able to maybe download malicious files while they're browsing the web and they may not even know what's going on. Or I don't want them to upload files of certain types based on certain applications. So we can do this based upon applications. I can say, hey, you know what? Somebody's web browsing and all of a sudden they try to attempt to download an executable in the background. It's probably an exploit or some sort of attack. The user's not even aware that they're doing that. Let's block them and protect them. Data filtering allows us to not only look at the file types, but look at the content of those files. And then I have the ability to be able to say, protect or block bank account numbers, social security numbers, passport numbers, federal ID numbers, those sort of things. So now I have the ability to actually look at the payload and look at the content that's being delivered by these files and make decisions not only based on the file type, but the content. Now, all of these, of course, require us to be able to see this information, right? Are we going to be able to block the ability to look at or to be able to see bank account numbers or credit card numbers or things like that in encrypted files? Well, not if we're not decrypting. Are we going to be able to see encrypted threats, antivirus or spyware, things like that, if we're not decrypting? Well, no, you have to decrypt. In a typical environment, what would you guess if you were to say how much of your traffic is encrypted? 70%, 90%, 99%, 100%? And as we always say at Palo Alto Networks, hey, it's about visibility and control. If you can't see it, you can't control it. You can't stop it. So decryption is really a big key on all of these threat protections. And the great thing about Prisma Access is you don't have those limitations on packets per second or concurrent sessions that you're able to decrypt and stuff like that. Decryption is included. You don't have to worry about the sizing of this. We take care of it for you. Couple of questions here as we go. Question about DNS Sinkhole. Why is PAN categorizing DNS queries to a particular domain is malicious? If you believe that we're categorizing a URL incorrectly, you have the ability to be able to create a list of URLs or URIs or host names or whatever that you would like us to be able to block or allow credential submissions to. So you do have the ability to customize any of these settings. All right, so back to what we were talking about here. WildFire allows us to take interesting traffic, interesting files that we think may or may not be malicious, and either analyze them in line on our nodes, on our security processing nodes, whether it's our mobile user security processing nodes or our remote network security processing nodes, and determine whether it's good or bad. We also have the ability to send it up to the cloud and take a look at that. When it comes to any of these different protections, first of all, they are all provided for and part of the basic subscription to Prisma Access. Unlike our on-premise firewalls or our virtual firewalls that you might have in your own public or private cloud, these include all the subscriptions, including all of your threat stuff. So you don't have to individually subscribe to this stuff. What you want to do is you want to create threat profiles of these different flavors, these different types, antivirus and anti-spyware and things like that, based upon the direction of your traffic. Now we have guidance and we have lots of documentation and papers and stuff like that that help you with this whole concept of directional traffic. All traffic through your network, whether you're talking about physical firewalls or Prisma Access or mobile users or remote network users, it's all going to be in one of three directions. It's either coming in, and with Prisma Access, that is fairly rare. And in that case, you're looking for, inbound threats. Or it's going out, which is the most common direction for Prisma Access. And outbound traffic is where you would want to do things such as spyware for the idea of the sinkholing, URL filtering, DNS protection, all of those sort of things, because of the direction of traffic. Now, the majority of your traffic, Prism Access, is going to be outbound. Users going out to the internet. If you have the interconnect license, or if you're using our Prisma SASE solution that includes Prisma SD-WAN, you could have internal traffic flows. And now you're starting to look towards things such as server vulnerabilities instead of client vulnerabilities and some things like that. So the idea is, based upon the traffic and the direction of the traffic, you might have slightly different settings for all of these. Now, we do have default profiles for all of our protections, and those work out pretty good. But you can do some customization based upon directionality and make these things even better. So keep that in mind as you think about that. So you want to create these different profiles for the different flows, inbound, outbound, and internal traffic. Again, with Prism Access, outbound is going to be your biggest thought. Now, other than our signature-based protections, well, we got WildFire. The idea of WildFire is we can take any sort of file or URL and either analyze it inline or send it up to the WildFire cloud for analysis. We will analyze that file or that URL, that specimen, and assign it one of several different categories. Now, if it's malware, we're going to write a signature that you can download with a real-time stream and be protected from it. If it is grayware, your spyware protection can protect you from that entire body of grayware, which would be things like browser helper objects, things like that aren't malicious, but they're certainly annoying. If it's a link to a phishing email that may take you to a site to try to steal credentials or to credential theft, we can send that to PanDB, and you can be protected through our URL filtering protections. And if it's benign, well, we'll tell you, hey, this is harmless. It's benign. Don't worry about it. So we have these different categories. We will block phishing and malware by default. We'll block grayware if you enable spyware protection and tell us to block grayware, but otherwise we don't do it automatically. And if it's benign, we'll let it through. We have real-time inline analysis available with Prism Access on our security processing nodes, right? We're only processing traffic and inspecting traffic on our SPNs, our security processing nodes, our RN SPNs for remote network users, sitting in an office, going out to the internet, and our MU SPNs, our mobile user SPNs, think global protect gateways, when users are going through and going out to the internet. And one of the things we have added recently is our inline machine learning. So all the information we have gathered throughout the years of behavior of malicious files and malware, and we do have the largest collection of malware specimens. I don't have numbers, current numbers, but before the pandemic, before the lockdown back in 2019, the last numbers I saw were that we had over 1.5 trillion with a T specimens of malware. And nobody in the world had anything close to that, including like these compendiums of different types of malware. So who knows what it is now? I mean, I would guess it's magnitudes larger, but I don't have the numbers. But in any case, the idea is we've learned a lot, and we have taken this information, and on board our security processing nodes, we have the ability to look at about 800, maybe 1,000 different components of a file and make an instant decision. Is this malware or not? If we believe it's malware, we can block it right away. We can also send it up to the WildFire cloud for validation, but we can take an action in real time. If it does not trigger our machine learning and triggers malware, we can still send it up to WildFire to look and analyze it. But now we can make that decision in real time. URL filtering allows us to look at different URLs, different URIs, everything out there, and use inline machine learning and the URL filtering cloud, or your own categories that you might create, and allows us to have several different actions. We can allow stuff. We can allow but log it with the alert function. We can block different sites or different categories of sites. Now that continue action, which says, hey, we're going to put up a block page, but you can get around it if you need to. And the override, which says, we're blocking this site, but if you got the password, we'll let you through. This uses, again, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and our known database of popular URLs. Tens of millions of them around the world. All outbound security policy rules should use URL filtering. There are some categories that we have in our default URL filtering profile that we block. We suggest you block these also if you're going to customize these, and they're written right here. Command and control, dynamic DNS, parked sites. So a parked site is a legitimate site where maybe a page has some malware or executables or malicious traffic on a particular site. You know, maybe it's my airline company that I go to all the time, but on some obscure page, somebody's parked some malware. Well, we can block that page and allow you to get to the rest of the site. Of course, proxy avoidance and anonymizers, things like that, known phishing sites, newly registered domains, things like that are things you should look at. At the beginning of your deployment, you may want to alert on all the other categories that you're thinking of allowing. So alerting does not affect the user, but it does log where everybody's going and categorizes every site. And after a little bit of knowledge and information and a baseline, you may be able to make better decisions on what you might want to allow or deny. So that's a good idea. Now, by default, we log a container page instead of every single ad banner and all that other stuff. So you probably want to stick with that. You probably don't want to move from the defaults. Now we can log things like user agents and things like that. So if you want to know, hey, what sort of browser are my users using? User agent. There's a great HTTP header logging that allows you to do that. Refers and export and forward headers. If you have users that have are going through some sort of a explicit proxy, we would see typically the IP address of that proxy server. So we couldn't tell one user from another one. Well, if we're using the X44 headers, that proxy server can inject the original user's IP address into the HTTP header in a field called the X44 header. So who this was forwarded for this IP address, now I can read the IP address. Emails can also be protected through WildFire. And as part of our URL filtering, we have an entire category called phishing. So we can look at emails even before a user opens the emails. They can be sent for analysis to WildFire. We can look at the links and basically test them. And if a link goes to a malicious site, if it's trying to steal credentials and user information, we have the ability to categorize that as phishing. And we have a URL filtering category for phishing, which you should block. A lot of you are probably familiar with a lot of these different things, but one of the protections you may or may not be familiar with is DNS Security. So DNS Security, sort of like WildFire, URL filtering, sinkholing, uses machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the idea is to stop malicious people going to malicious domains instantly, protect against things like automated attacks and DOS attacks. We use our machine learning and artificial intelligence to block and protect against these real-time emerging in real-time DNS-based attacks like ultra-slow DNS tunneling, dangling DNS, DNS rebindings, reflector attacks, things like that. Now, we got some great links here at the bottom from our threat intelligence team, Unit 42. Great information, great stuff. We've got more detailed information about DNS security that you can talk about. Unfortunately, we can't spend a ton of time here. We're running a little bit short, but this is a protection that's included with Prism Access. That would be an extra subscription on your on-premise firewalls, but it's included with us, so use it. It also has the ability to detect and look at DNS tunneling, which was a question a little bit earlier. So it is available. It gives you automated enforcement with Prism Access. With on-premise firewalls, as I said, it's a subscription. The whole idea here is if there's an infected host that makes a request, it goes through one of our security processing nodes within Prism Access. We have the ability to do a lookup locally of known malicious domains through our signatures that we have with our spyware protection and DNS protection, URL filtering. Try to make an instant decision, or if not, we have the ability to do a cloud lookup, which leverages things like data we've gotten from WildFire, our threat intelligence information like we get from Unit 42, that we get from our partners in the Threat Alliance. We partner with several other security vendors that you'd be familiar with, like Rapid7 and Checkpoint and all this sort of stuff. And we share threat intelligence with them and they share with us so we can keep each other informed. Using behavioral based or heuristic based information, our machine learning, our artificial intelligence, we can give you a near real-time response to a DNS request, and we can block that request or that response if it turns out to be malicious. So this gives us the ability to be able, again, without a subscription, but included with Prisma Access, but an additional subscription with on-premise firewalls, to block known bad domains and use our machine learning to predict bad stuff, identify DNS tunneling, using using passive DNS, and WildFire, our honeypots, our URL filtering information from the Cyber Threat Alliance that I was talking about, and of course our internal threat group, Uni42. Leverage all of that to give you real-time protection through Prisma Access. So DNS security is a pretty cool thing that, as I said, is maybe a little new and may not be familiar to a lot of you, whereas some of the other ones might have been. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and open the floor to any sort of questions or comments that anybody may have. We answered a few as we went along, but if there's anything outstanding, there is a Q&A function. We'd be happy to stick around, hang out, answer questions.